I never thought I'd walk away from love and wealth in the same moment. As a black woman from humble beginnings, I wasn't prepared for what came next. The billionaire I rejected, he showed me what real love looks like, beyond the mansions and money. They say money can't buy love, but nobody tells you what happens when love and money collide in your life at the same time. I'm Jasmine, and 2 years ago, I was just a graphic designer from Southside Chicago, with big dreams and an even bigger heart. Now I'm sitting here trying to make sense of a journey that took me from my modest apartment to penthouses and private jets, and then back to the essence of what really matters. Before I share how my life changed forever, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories of unexpected love and triumph. Trust me, what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It might help you recognize real love when it shows up in your life, even if it's wearing an unexpected disguise. I never imagined I'd be the woman walking away from billions. Who does that, right? But when you feel like your soul is shrinking, even as your closet is expanding, something has to give. What I never expected was what happened after I left. How a man who could buy anything he wanted finally understood that the one thing he truly needed couldn't be purchased. I grew up with my mom and grandmother in a 2-bedroom apartment where the heat was sometimes optional in Chicago winters. We had love, though, plenty of it. My grandmother's hands were always busy, either braiding my hair while telling me stories about our ancestors, or cooking meals that filled our small home with aromas that made even the simplest foods feel like feasts. My mother worked 2 jobs, but still managed to attend every school event. Her eyes always the proudest ones in any room I entered. College was a patchwork of scholarships, loans, and late-night shifts at a coffee shop near campus. I studied design because I loved how the right visual could tell a story without words, how colors and shapes could make people feel something. By 27, I had built a decent freelance business creating branding packages for small Black-owned businesses in Chicago. It wasn't making me rich, but it was meaningful. I was the girl who believed passion would eventually pay the bills, who thought love would find me when the time was right. Then David walked into my life, or rather, I walked into his building, for what I thought was just another client meeting. I had no idea that crossing that marble-floored lobby would lead me down a path that would test everything I thought I knew about love, wealth, identity, and what it means to truly see someone for who they are. Looking back now, I realize that some journeys don't just change your address or your bank balance, they change your soul. This is the story of how I walked away from a billionaire, and how he proved his love for this Black woman in ways that no amount of money could ever express. It was a Tuesday morning in April when I first met David. I remember because it had rained the night before, and the Chicago skyline had that freshly washed gleam to it. I was running late for what my agent had described as a big opportunity, a tech company looking to rebrand their foundation's initiatives in underserved communities, the kind of client that could put my small design studio on the map. I rushed into the gleaming glass tower on Michigan Avenue, my portfolio case bumping against my hip, rain-spotted sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The receptionist looked me up and down with that subtle assessment I'd grown used to, the silent questioning of whether I belonged in spaces like this. "Jasmine Carter, I have a 10 a.m. with the Harden Foundation," I said, straightening my blazer, the one I'd splurged on 3 tax returns ago. "Mr. Harden is waiting for you in the penthouse conference room," she replied, handing me a visitor's badge. I didn't register the significance of that, Mr. Harden, until the elevator doors opened on the 48th floor, and there he was. Not some foundation director, but David Harden himself, the founder and CEO of Catalyst Technologies. "You're late," he said, but with a smile that seemed genuinely amused rather than annoyed. "I've been looking forward to this meeting." He wasn't what I expected. Tall, yes, and impeccably dressed in what I would later learn was a bespoke suit that cost more than my rent. But there was something unexpectedly warm about his eyes. They crinkled at the corners when he smiled, revealing a man who laughed often. I'd researched the foundation, but hadn't expected to pitch to the billionaire himself. I fumbled with my portfolio, dropping several sample boards. We both bent to pick them up, our hands brushing. "These are impressive," he said, studying my work with genuine interest. "You have a unique perspective." "That's exactly what we need." The meeting stretched from the scheduled 30 minutes to 2 hours. We talked about design, yes, but also about community impact, about my experiences growing up in Southside Chicago, about his vision for technology that served humanity rather than just shareholders. By the time we finished, I'd secured not just the foundation project, but an offer to overhaul the visual identity for several of his company's community initiatives. "You should celebrate," he said as we wrapped up. "Have dinner with me tonight. I know a place that makes Chicago deep dish that would put your neighborhood spots to shame." I should have said no. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "Baby girl, be careful of men who seem too good to be true." But there was something disarming about the way he asked, not like a man used to buying whatever he wanted, but like someone genuinely interested in continuing our conversation. "I don't mix business with pleasure," I replied, trying to sound professional despite the flutter in my chest. "Then let's call it research," he countered. "I want to understand how someone sees the world the way you do. Your designs tell stories I've never heard before." That first dinner led to a second, and then weekend brunches where we argued passionately about everything from urban development to whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It absolutely does not, and I will die on that hill. We visited art galleries where David seemed more interested in my interpretations than the curator's notes. He took me to community centers in neighborhoods he was investing in, genuinely listening when I pointed out the disconnect between what his foundation provided and what the community actually needed. 3 months in, I realized I was falling for him. It wasn't about the wealth, though I won't lie. The private jet to see a Basquiat exhibition in New York for our 5th date was impressive. It was the way he looked at me when I spoke, like every word mattered. The way he remembered small details about my family. The way he seemed to value my perspective, especially when it differed from his own. "You challenge me," he told me one night as we stood on his penthouse balcony overlooking the city lights. "Everyone else tells me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what I need to know." But there were moments that gave me pause. The dinner party where his friends' wives asked if I did my own hair, their fingers itching to touch it without permission. The business associate who complimented David on his exotic girlfriend. The way David sometimes failed to notice these small injuries, or worse, dismissed them as oversensitivity when I brought them up. "They didn't mean anything by it," he'd say. "You're reading too much into things." Then came the fundraising gala 6 months into our relationship. I'd spent weeks designing the materials, creating an atmosphere that celebrated the communities his foundation served rather than just the wealthy donors who funded them. I was proud of what I'd created. But as we circulated through the crowd, I heard whispers. "She's done well for herself, hasn't she? I wonder how long this one will last. It's nice that David is so charitable." David didn't hear them or chose not to, but later that night, when a board member praised the urban aesthetic of my designs and asked if I'd grown up in the projects, David laughed and squeezed my hand. "Jasmine has an incredible eye for authentic experiences," he said, as if my life was some kind of artistic perspective I'd adopted rather than my actual history. That night, lying awake in his California king bed with its perfect view of the city, I felt the first real crack in what had seemed like a fairy tale. I loved this man, his brilliance, his vision, his capacity for kindness. But I was beginning to wonder if he could ever truly see me, or if I was just another acquisition, an interesting addition to his collection. Still, when he whispered, "I love you," for the first time that night, I said it back, and I meant it. What I didn't know then was how that love would be tested, or what it would cost us both to find its true measure. the transition into David's world happened so gradually that I barely noticed I was losing myself. One day, I was living in my apartment with mismatched furniture and artwork from local creators. The next, I was waking up in a penthouse where the kitchen island cost more than my mother's car. My clothes migrated from my closet to his, replaced by designer labels I couldn't pronounce. I remember staring at myself in a $5,000 dress, wondering if the woman in the mirror was really me. David's universe operated on unspoken rules I was never taught. The way you hold a wine glass, which fork to use first. The topics deemed appropriate for dinner conversation, and those that made rooms go uncomfortably silent, like when I mentioned gentrification or police brutality. In these gilded spaces, I became hyper-aware of my blackness. It felt simultaneously invisible and glaringly obvious. I was often the only black woman not serving drinks or checking coats, a fact no one acknowledged but everyone noticed. Just be yourself, David would say, not understanding that myself was precisely what didn't fit in his world. When board members' wives invited me to charity luncheons, their compliments felt like anthropological observations. "You're so articulate," they'd say, or, "Your hair is fascinating. Can I touch it?" David never understood why these interactions left me drained. "They're trying to connect with you," he'd insist, missing the point entirely. The distance between us grew with each fundraiser, where I became his diverse perspective rather than his partner, with each weekend at the Hamptons, where staff mistook me for household help, with each family dinner, where his mother spoke about culture as if it were an interesting museum exhibit. What hurt most wasn't the microaggressions, it was David's blindness to them. Slowly, inevitably, I began to disappear, becoming a well-dressed ghost haunting the margins of his privileged existence. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches or thrown champagne glasses. It was a quiet moment at a charity gala celebrating David's Foundation's work in urban education. I stood in a corner, watching him charm potential donors, when the wife of a tech CEO approached me. "It's so wonderful what David's doing for those poor children," she said, champagne flute dangling between manicured fingers. "And having someone like you by his side, well, it gives the whole thing authenticity, doesn't it?" I smiled politely, as I'd learned to do, while something crumbled inside me. Across the room, David caught my eye and winked, oblivious to my pain. Later that night, as we rode home in his sleek Tesla, I finally spoke the words that had been building for months. "I can't do this anymore, David." He looked confused, like I'd suddenly started speaking a language he didn't understand. "Do what? The foundation work? We can scale back your involvement if you're feeling overwhelmed." "No," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "This, United States, I'm disappearing in your world, and you don't even see it happening." The conversation that followed lasted until dawn. I tried to explain how it felt to be seen as an accessory, a diversity statement, a charity case. How exhausting it was to navigate spaces that weren't built for me, to constantly translate my experiences into terms his world could digest. How lonely it was to have my reality questioned or dismissed. "But I love you," he kept saying, as if that should be enough. "I know," I told him, "but love without understanding isn't enough." I packed my things the next morning while he was at work. I left my key on the counter, alongside the diamond bracelet he'd given me for our anniversary. I didn't take the designer clothes or the expensive jewelry. None of it felt like me anyway. I just took what I'd brought into the relationship, my portfolio, my grandmother's quilt, and the dignity I refused to compromise any further. My old apartment was still available. I'd never given it up, something David had always questioned. "Why pay rent on a place you never use?" he'd asked. Now I understood it had been self-preservation, some part of me knowing I might need an escape hatch. The first night back in my own space, surrounded by walls I'd painted myself and furniture with stories behind every scratch, I cried until my body ached. I mourned what could have been if David had been able to truly see me. I questioned if I was throwing away my one shot at having it all. But beneath the grief was something else: relief. For the first time in months, I could breathe without measuring my worth against standards never meant for someone like me. My phone buzzed constantly with David's calls and texts, alternating between confusion, anger, and pleading. "Just tell me what I did wrong," he wrote. "Whatever it is, I can fix it." That was the problem. He saw this as a technical issue to solve, not a fundamental disconnect in how we experience the world. After a week, I finally replied with a simple truth: "You can't fix what you can't see." Then I blocked his number, deactivated my social media accounts, and told mutual friends I needed space. I knew if I kept any connection open, I might weaken, and I needed to find myself again before I could consider finding my way back to him, if that was even possible. 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. I threw myself into my work, reconnected with friends I'd neglected, and started therapy to process what had happened. I was healing, slowly finding my rhythm again. Then one rainy afternoon, my doorbell rang. I expected a package delivery. Instead, I found David standing there, soaking wet, no umbrella, no driver waiting in a luxury car. Just him, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. "Please," he said, "just 5 minutes." I should have closed the door. But something in his eyes, a rawness I'd never seen before, made me step aside. He didn't try to convince me to come back. He didn't make promises or declarations. Instead, he handed me a journal, leather-bound, filled with his handwriting. "I've been listening," he said simply. Really listening, for the first time. After he left, I opened the journal. It was filled with notes from books by Black authors I'd mentioned in passing, reflections on conversations with diversity consultants he'd hired for his company, painful admissions of his own blind spots and privileges. The last entry read, "I never saw the water I was swimming in until Jasmine walked away." A week later, a community center in my old neighborhood received an anonymous donation, not with David's name splashed across a building, but funds allocated exactly as the community leaders requested, with no strings attached. I knew it was him, but he never mentioned it. Then I heard through mutual friends that he'd restructured his entire foundation, bringing in leaders from the communities they served, changing the power dynamics. Again, he didn't reach out to tell me or seek credit. 2 months after I left, I received an invitation to a small gallery showing. The exhibition featured work by Black artists from Chicago's South Side, artists I'd mentioned admiring, but who had never received mainstream recognition. In the program notes, there was no mention of David's involvement, though I learned later he had financed the entire show without putting his name anywhere. I went curious but cautious. David was there, standing quietly in the corner, not commanding attention as he usually did. When our eyes met, he nodded but didn't approach me. He was giving me space, I realized, respecting my boundaries for perhaps the first time. Later that evening, as I was leaving, he finally approached. "I'm not here to win you back," he said. "I just want you to know I'm doing the work. Not for you, though you inspired it, but because it's right. Because I was wrong." Over the following months, a pattern emerged. David would appear in my periphery, never demanding attention, but quietly demonstrating change. He joined a reading group led by a professor of African American studies. He stepped back from speaking roles at his foundation events, instead amplifying the voices of those with lived experience. When a national news outlet wanted to profile his philanthropic transformation, he declined unless they would center the stories of community leaders instead. The most telling moment came 6 months after our breakup. We ran into each other at a community art fair in my neighborhood. As we awkwardly chatted, a local elder approached us, addressing me warmly before turning to David with suspicion. "And who's this gentleman?" she asked, protective of her community. Before I could answer, David extended his hand and said, "I'm just a student, ma'am. Still learning." Later that day, he asked if we could talk, really talk. Over coffee in a small neighborhood cafe, he spoke without defensiveness about his journey. "I always thought I was one of the good ones," he admitted, "a progressive billionaire using his money for good causes. But I never questioned the system that allowed me to accumulate that wealth while others struggled. I never recognized how my help sometimes perpetuated the very power dynamics I claimed to be fighting against." He told me about uncomfortable conversations with other wealthy friends, about losing business relationships when he began advocating for structural changes rather than charitable band-aids, about the criticism he faced when he supported legislation that would actually increase his own tax burden. "For the first time in my life," he said, "I'm making choices that might reduce my wealth or power, and I've never felt richer." I didn't fall back into his arms that day. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But I saw something in him I'd never seen before, a humility that made his power less threatening and more promising, a willingness to be uncomfortable, to learn publicly, to admit he didn't have all the answers. The man sitting across from me wasn't the same one I'd walked away from. He wasn't perfect. He still stumbled sometimes, still had blind spots. But the difference was that now, when someone pointed them out, he listened. He didn't defend or explain away. He heard. And for the first time since I'd known him, I felt truly seen. We didn't rush back together. Instead, we built something new, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. 8 months after I walked away, we met at a small park where we'd had our third date. The air was crisp with early autumn, leaves turning gold around us. "I've been thinking about what a relationship between us would look like," I said, watching a family nearby flying a kite. Not what it was before, but what it could be now. David nodded, giving me the space to continue. This was another change, his willingness to listen without immediately offering solutions or steering the conversation. "I need a partner, not a savior or a sponsor," I told him. "I need someone who understands that my experiences aren't theoretical, that the weight I carry as a Black woman in this world isn't something I can check at the door of our relationship." "I can't promise I'll always understand," he admitted, "but I can promise I'll never stop trying to, and I'll believe you even when your reality doesn't match mine." We set boundaries that would have seemed impossible in our previous relationship. I kept my apartment, maintaining my independence. We agreed that gifts would be thoughtful rather than extravagant, celebrations of our connection rather than displays of his wealth. Most importantly, we committed to honesty, even when it hurt, even when it exposed uncomfortable truths about privilege, race, and the systems we navigate differently. The most profound change came in how we moved through the world together. David no longer tried to shield me from the microaggressions of his social circle. Instead, he began addressing them directly, standing beside me rather than trying to speak for me. When a business associate made a comment about my exotic beauty at a dinner party, David didn't smooth it over, as he once would have. Instead, he said simply, "Her name is Jasmine, and there's nothing exotic about treating her with respect. We still face challenges. There are still moments when our different experiences of the world create friction. But now, that friction generates light rather than heat. We've learned to sit in discomfort together, to recognize that growth happens in those uncomfortable spaces. Today, we share our lives but maintain our separate identities. I've expanded my design studio, focusing on projects that amplify underrepresented voices. David has restructured his business practices and philanthropic work, moving from charity to solidarity, from helping to partnering. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's authentic, built on mutual respect and the courage to keep showing up, even when it's difficult. Love, I've learned, isn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It's about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and choosing them anyway, complications and all. It's about growing together, even when that growth requires painful pruning of old beliefs and habits. It's about creating a relationship where both people can exist in their full humanity, without dimming their light or silencing their truth. Looking back now, I realize that walking away was the bravest and most loving thing I could have done, not just for myself, but for David too. Sometimes love requires distance before it can truly flourish. Sometimes we need to break what isn't working to build something stronger in its place. I never expected a billionaire to change for me. In a world where wealth often insulates people from growth, where privilege can become a fortress against uncomfortable truths, David chose vulnerability instead. He proved his love not with diamonds or dream homes, but with the hardest currency of all: humility, self-reflection, and genuine change. My grandmother used to tell me, "Baby girl, a man who truly loves you will see you completely, even the parts you try to hide." What she didn't say is that sometimes, for someone to see you completely, they first have to recognize their own blindness. That kind of vision doesn't happen overnight. It's earned through countless moments of choosing understanding over defensiveness, growth over comfort. Our story isn't about a black woman being rescued by wealth, or about a white billionaire finding redemption through love across difference. It's about two people choosing to do the difficult, beautiful work of loving each other across divides that society tells us are too wide to cross. It's about recognizing that love isn't blind. Love sees clearly and loves anyway. Today, we're building a life that honors both our worlds, rather than asking either of us to disappear into the other's. We're creating a relationship that doesn't ignore our differences, but celebrates the strength that comes from bringing diverse perspectives together. It's messy sometimes, complicated often, but always, always real. If this story touched you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that true love means being seen for who you really are. Leave a comment about a time someone proved their love to you in an unexpected way, because in the end, that's what matters. Not the grand gestures or the fairy tale trappings, but the quiet revolution of being truly known and loved exactly as you are,